Marcus Williams had always been a quiet, introspective, and dedicated student. He grew up in a modest neighborhood in the Bronx, New York, where hardships were plenty, but his family's strength kept him motivated. His parents, Linda and James Williams, were tireless workers. Linda was a nursing assistant, working long shifts at a hospital, while James, who had once worked in construction, suffered an accident and now did odd jobs to help pay the bills. They lived in a small two-bedroom apartment, where the constant noise of the city never seemed to stop, but for Marcus, it was his refuge. The home was simple but full of love and determination. Life at home was modest but dignified. His parents always encouraged him to study, believing that education would be his way out of the challenges society imposed on him. "Don't let anyone tell you what you can or can't be," his mother would always say, as she quickly prepared dinner before heading out for her second shift. James, still bitter about not being able to support the family the way he used to, did everything he could to pass on values of perseverance to his son. He knew that the world outside wouldn't be easy for Marcus, a young black man in a society that often saw him as less before even knowing him. From a young age, Marcus understood what it was like to be treated differently because of his skin color. At school, despite being one of the brightest students, he was often overlooked by his teachers. It wasn't uncommon for Marcus to raise his hand and be deliberately ignored while other white students were called on without hesitation. By the time he was 13, he had begun to notice the looks, the whispers, and how the adults around him seemed to treat him with a mix of condescension and disdain. He felt the frustration of being invisible. Now, in his senior year of high school, Marcus was one of the top students at Bronx High School of Science, one of New York's most prestigious public schools. But to many of his teachers, he remained just another black kid, someone they didn't expect much from. The racism Marcus faced wasn't always overt. It was often subtle, implicit. But the feeling of being underestimated, of being invisible to his educators, was a constant pain. Mr. Parker, his American history teacher, was one of the worst offenders. Parker, a middle-aged, white man, believed he knew everything about his students, and never saw potential in Marcus. Despite his excellent grades, Parker always ignored Marcus' contributions in class and was openly skeptical of his abilities. He preferred to focus his attention on other students, usually those from wealthier, more privileged backgrounds, who, in his eyes, had more potential for success. Marcus, who had always felt the distance Parker kept, accepted it in silence, knowing his moment to shine would come. But this disdain wasn't limited to school. Outside of it, Marcus and his family faced prejudice daily. The Bronx was a tough area, where many young black men, like Marcus, were viewed with suspicion, even when they did everything right. He had been followed by security guards in stores, stopped by the police, while walking home from a library, and often received wary looks from people who knew nothing about him, except the color of his skin. This type of racism, the everyday racism, was something Marcus had learned to endure, but never accept. His parents understood this better than anyone. James, in particular, carried the emotional scars of a lifetime of dealing with prejudice. He would tell Marcus stories about when he was young, and how he had lost opportunities because of his skin color. James had once dreamed of being an engineer, but was repeatedly discouraged by teachers and bosses who never believed in his potential. "Don't let them take your dreams away, Marcus. You're better than they think," James would say, always with a subtle sadness in his eyes. While Marcus tried to cope with the constant pressure and subtle racism he faced at school, he found solace in books. He spent hours in the library, immersed in the works of great black thinkers like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr. and Toni Morrison. These books inspired him, reminding him that he was part of a lineage of resistance and resilience. Even when the world tried to diminish him, Marcus knew there was a strength inside him that no one could take away. On the morning when everything changed, Marcus walked into the classroom with the same calm expression he always wore. He arrived early, sat in the front row, and quietly waited for class to begin. But that week, there was something different in the air. Graduation was approaching, and the preparations were taking over the school. The theme of the lessons had shifted to discussions about academic achievements, the future, and the importance of the graduation ceremony. Mr. Parker, as always, conducted the class with his usual arrogant tone. "Some of you will be up there on stage, receiving awards, speaking to all of us about what it means to be an exemplary student," he said, with a meaningful look at the white students sitting in the front row. He smiled proudly at one of them, a boy named Ethan, who came from a wealthy family on the Upper East Side and was the typical example of the perfect student in Parker's eyes. Marcus, as always, remained silent, taking notes. He knew his opportunity was coming, but it wasn't time yet. What he didn't expect was what happened next. Mr. Parker walked around the room, stopping beside Marcus' desk. "So, Marcus," he said, with a tone of voice that clearly conveyed disdain, "what do you plan to do after school? Any big plans?" The teacher let out a sarcastic laugh. Some students chuckled quietly, waiting to see how Marcus would react. "Maybe you'll work somewhere more appropriate," Parker insinuated, making it clear he didn't expect anything grand from Marcus. The comment hit like a punch to the gut. Marcus felt the shame and anger welling up inside him, but he kept calm. He was used to this kind of humiliation. Parker didn't know that at that very moment, Marcus was the valedictorian of the class, the student with the highest grades in the entire school, with the honor of delivering the graduation speech. Marcus knew that soon he would have the chance to express himself in a way Parker never expected. As the class continued, Parker's voice became a distant noise. Marcus thought about his mother, who had sacrificed so much to ensure he could study, and his father, who always encouraged him to fight against the limited expectations others placed on him. He knew his graduation speech would be more than just a talk. It would be a moment of vindication. In the weeks leading up to graduation, Marcus prepared for the ceremony. He wrote and rewrote his speech countless times, wanting every word to be perfect. It wouldn't just be a speech about academic achievements. It would be about the racism he had faced, and how, despite it all, he persevered. He knew his words would carry weight, and that, in that moment, he would have the opportunity to make his teachers and classmates finally see who he really was. Meanwhile, Mr. Parker continued to ignore Marcus in class, treating him as if he didn't matter. Marcus watched in silence as the teacher constantly praised other students, especially Ethan, whom he seemed to see as the perfect example of success. The difference in treatment was obvious to everyone, but no one dared to question Parker. At home, Marcus found support from his parents. Linda, even exhausted after long shifts at the hospital, always found time to ask about Marcus' speech. She knew it was more than just a graduation. It was a chance for Marcus to speak about his experiences and challenge the prejudices he had faced. James, though still grappling with his own frustrations about racial injustice, supported his son with words of encouragement. The day of graduation finally arrived, and the school was packed. The students were dressed in their caps and gowns. Excited for the moment, they would walk across the stage and close this chapter of their lives. But Marcus was focused on something much bigger. For him, this wouldn't just be another graduation ceremony. It would be the moment to reveal everything he had endured in silence. The auditorium was full. His parents sat in the front row, and Marcus could see the pride in their eyes. Linda, always so strong, had tears of happiness glistening on her face. James, usually so reserved, held his wife's hand tightly, as if trying to contain his own emotions. For them, this moment represented not only Marcus' achievement, but the triumph of their entire family. The school's principal took the stage to make the usual announcements, thanking the students, parents, and teachers for their support throughout the school year. Then, he looked down at the list in his hands, paused briefly, and smiled before speaking. "Now, we have the honor of introducing the valedictorian of the class of 2024, Marcus Williams." There was a brief silence in the room before hesitant applause began to spread. Many of Marcus' classmates seemed surprised. They had no idea that the quiet student, who rarely spoke during class, had earned the highest grades in the school. But the most striking reaction came from Mr. Parker. The teacher, sitting alongside other faculty members, looked stunned. He had never imagined that Marcus would be the best student in the school. As Marcus walked to the stage, his heart was pounding. He felt the weight of everything he had faced up to this moment. He knew that his words could resonate not only with his classmates, but with everyone who, like him, had been underestimated because of their appearance, or because of prejudice. He positioned himself behind the podium, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are here to celebrate one of the most important moments of our lives, graduation. But before we move on, I want to talk about something that many of us carry in our hearts, but rarely have the chance to express." Marcus paused and looked at the audience. He could feel everyone's attention focused on him, and he continued, his voice firm and clear. "All grew up believing that education was the key to changing the world. My parents, who are here today, always taught me that knowledge is something no one can take away from you. But throughout my journey, I learned that while knowledge is important, there are barriers that try to stop us from reaching our dreams. These barriers aren't always visible, but we feel them every day. For me, one of those barriers was the color of my skin." The room fell into complete silence. Marcus knew that many in the audience hadn't expected this. But he didn't hesitate. Over the past few years, I have been constantly underestimated. I've been treated as if my ideas weren't good enough. As if the fact that I am who I am automatically put me at a disadvantage. And it wasn't just me. Many of us here know what it feels like to be looked down on, to be ignored, to be silenced. We know what it's like to walk into a room and feel like no one expects you to succeed. That's what I faced, and it's something that millions of black youth face every day. He paused, letting his words resonate throughout the auditorium. But today, I am here to say that the color of our skin does not define our worth. We are just as capable, just as intelligent, and just as deserving of success as anyone else. Throughout my life, I have listened to people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and so many other leaders who fought for equality and justice. They taught me that racism can try to knock us down, but it will never destroy our spirit. Marcus looked at his parents in the front row and felt a wave of emotion. His mother wiped her tears, and his father, who rarely showed emotion, couldn't hide the pride he felt. What brought me here today wasn't the desire to prove I'm better than others. It was the desire to prove to myself that I can overcome any obstacle, that I can fight against any adversity. And to those of you listening, I say the same. Never let anyone tell you what you can or cannot achieve. Never let the low expectations of others dictate who you are. He took a deep breath before continuing, his voice stronger. Racism, discrimination, prejudice. These are obstacles we still need to face in our society. I won't pretend that this fight is close to being over, but each one of us can make a difference. Every time we stand up and refuse to accept less than we deserve, we are changing the world. And believe me, we are changing the world. Today, I stand here as proof that when we refuse to bow down, when we face our challenges head on, we win. The room erupted in applause, but Marcus wasn't finished yet. He gestured for them to wait, and the silence returned. To those who underestimated me, and you know who you are, I hold no grudges. In fact, I thank you, because every time I was ignored or belittled, every time someone thought I wasn't capable, I used it as fuel to keep going. And, in the end, here I am, standing tall, valedictorian of the class of 2024, and ready to face the world with all the knowledge, strength, and resilience my journey has given me. Finally, with a soft smile on his face, Marcus concluded, I know we have a long way to go, but together we can make our dreams a reality. And remember, our worth will never be defined by what others expect of us. Our worth is defined by what we know we are capable of doing. Thank you very much. The crowd erupted into applause. Everyone, parents, students, teachers, was on their feet, clapping thunderously. The emotion of his speech swept through the auditorium. Marcus looked out into the audience, but his gaze lingered for a brief moment on Mr. Parker, whose face, now, showed a mix of surprise and shame. Marcus had proven his in a way Parker had never imagined. As Marcus stepped down from the stage, his parents hugged him tightly. Linda held him for several seconds, sobbing with emotion, while James just nodded, tears in his eyes. I always knew, he whispered to Marcus, the pride evident in his voice, you're stronger than all of them. After the ceremony, many of Marcus' classmates, who had previously ignored him, now came up to congratulate him. Some teachers also shook his hand, still shocked by the speech they had just heard. Mr. Parker, meanwhile, approached hesitantly. Marcus, he began, his voice faltering. I just wanted to say, you surprised me. You're impressive. I'm sorry for underestimating you. Marcus looked at him for a moment, considering what the apology meant. He knew Parker's racism wasn't something that would disappear with a single conversation, but that moment was important. Thank you, Mr. Parker. Marcus replied calmly. I hope this makes you think differently in the future. As the crowd began to disperse, Marcus walked away, feeling the weight of his words. He knew his fight was only beginning, but now, more than ever, he was ready to face the world. Marcus' story is a powerful reminder that we should never allow others' prejudices and low expectations to define who we are. He faced challenges head-on and, with resilience, proved his worth to everyone who underestimated him. If you are inspired by this story, and want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos.